Hey guys, what's going on? This is Andrew here today, and I thought I would start another IGTV series called My History with Gaming, where I talk about my history with certain consoles, games, or just platforms in general. Today, we're going to be starting off talking about Xbox, a platform that has had a lot of harsh criticism over the years. As I make my next few videos, in the series, we're just going to be covering like the console platforms, but later on, when I'm done discussing PlayStation, Nintendo, and Sega, and Xbox, we will start talking about franchises and games as well. Let's start off talking about how I got into Xbox. Basically, I was pretty young when my father first got his original Xbox, so I wasn't old enough to remember that time. To be fair, I was born in June of 2001, so I'm only a few months older than the console itself. By the time I had memories of the console, it was actually pretty close to the launch of the Xbox 360, which I didn't figure out existed until about 2008. Some games that I can remember clearly from that time would have been MX Unleashed, Tomb Raider Legend, Halo CE N2, and Burnout 3. As much as this console was part of my childhood, it was one that I really didn't play too often, as my father didn't want any of my brothers and I near the system unless he was around, because we were little kids, you don't want little kids touching your discs or your systems. At that point, I ended up getting a GameCube in 2006 for Christmas that my younger brothers and I shared, although I was really the only one that played it for the most part, since they were both pretty young at the time. But we aren't talking about Nintendo in this video, so let's jump into some more topics about the system. As I've stated in the past, The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers is the first game that I was ever obsessed with, and that obsession began on the original Xbox. It was 2007, and I had been playing my GameCube for a decent amount of time to finally develop coordination to play harder types of games. Like I said before, my dad didn't let me play his games while he was around, and I only got to play it a decent amount of times on that system. Finally, I got my own copy of the game on the GameCube, and at that point, I played the game so much and got so into it that I remember being alright with shitting myself, so I didn't have to get up from playing the game. Although whenever I had the chance to play the game on the Xbox, I took it since my dad had a bigger TV than I did. The obsession got so bad to where I started acting out and saying violent things, so my dad took the game away, and that put a pause on my time on Xbox for a few years. Fast forward 3 years, and it is now 2010. My dad had stopped playing games for some time at this point since he had become much more busy working, and even if he wanted to game, he couldn't. At this point, the original Xbox, like many others, developed a disc reading problem, and that basically bricked the system since there were no digital games back then, and he didn't want to have to buy replacement parts or a new system since he really just did not have time to play video games anymore. My mom stepped in, and she got my dad an Xbox 360 for Christmas that year. I had not touched an Xbox in years at this point, and it was pretty cool to see us have something like this. My experience with the 360 wasn't as typical as you would think though, and that is because my parents still didn't want me playing violent video games other than Halo 3 as long as my dad was around. I mainly played the Kinect type games since those were the games my mom got us to play as a family, while I still had the Wii and DS as my main platforms. Fast forward to the beginning of my 5th grade year in 2011, and we're now in my Guitar Hero days. Although I had World Tour and GH3 on the Wii at the time, I had GH2 on the Xbox 360, but I didn't have a guitar. Guitar Hero was the only game that I played during this time period until my friend Tyler came over with GTA 4 in May of 2012. Still 5th grade, by the way. And at this point, I started understanding how awesome the Xbox 360 was. Finally, my 11th birthday came around, and that was probably one of my favorite memories of playing GTA 5, as my friends and I would take turns going on full-on rampages. Although the same problem came around after my birthday party, and that was that my dad had to monitor my playing. Luckily, that didn't go on very long though, and eventually he stopped caring. That same year, I had 2 other friends in our group who were really into the WWE and Call of Duty franchise, one of them being Fat Matt, a Call of Duty content creator who I will actually be leaving the link of in the description. At that time, we would all play Guitar Hero and WWE together, but when that was done, I would sit there and watch them grind Kino on Black Ops 1, as I had no skill to even get past round 1 at the time. If it weren't for them, I don't think I ever would have gotten into the Call of Duty franchise, or maybe into shooters in general. A few months later, 6th grade comes around. As I mentioned before, my family stopped caring about me playing violent video games at this point because they realized that I was just going to be playing them at my friends' houses anyway. Christmas comes along, and I got a pretty big haul of things that I want to say influenced everything the way it is today. I got my first full-size guitar, an Ibanez Geo Red guitar, Guitar Hero 3 for the Xbox 360, as well as my first Explorer, and Black Ops 2, my first ever shooter game that was now my own. As I stated before, Guitar Hero was my main game. Since practically everyone in the community had a 360 since the game had the DLC songs, I got Xbox Live for the first time ever, and that was my introduction into online gaming other than Roblox. This also subtly introduced me to playing Black Ops 2 online since all of my friends had it. My cousin had it as well, but the only problem was that he had it on PS3, and that was my only way of playing any of the new maps since I actually didn't end up getting the maps for Xbox 360. Although I only had the original Mw2 maps since I didn't get the season pass, I would sit there for hours trying to get better at it on my own. Eventually, I went to this place in Vermont called Teen Alley in Smuggler's Notch, and my cousin and I played zombies together, and he helped me understand how zombies worked with all the perks and all that stuff, because back then I didn't get any perks. This was my real introduction into Call of Duty Zombies, and to this day, Black Ops 2 is my favorite Call of Duty of all time, and possibly one of my favorite shooters of all time as well. 1 year later, it is now 2013, and GTA 5 had just launched, and I played it at my friend Tyler's house because he got the game on day 2, I think. This had to be the first game that I was extremely impressed by how it looked, and this caused me to get my own copy later that year. Here's the thing. I didn't have a console to myself other than the DS at this point, as I was sharing systems with my family. I wanted to get better at games, but I was being held back by the fact that I had to let my brothers play the systems as well. Finally, I decided that it was time to get my own Xbox 360. Yes, I know that the Xbox One and PS4 had just come out, but my friends were telling me to stay away from the console since they were new, and especially the Xbox One as it had major issues at launch, with Xbox's business model at the time. Christmas came around, and I finally got my own 360 that I was able to keep in my room. I got Call of Duty Ghosts and Battlefield 4, but it turned out that my mom accidentally got me the 4GB system, so I couldn't play Battlefield 4 without an Xbox hard drive. I didn't know you can get an Xbox hard drive and put it in the system, so at that point, I just ended up giving my friend Battlefield 4 as a birthday present. But I did play Ghosts quite a lot because I did end up getting a flash drive. I never really got into the multiplayer scene in BO2, and that's just because I was absolute shit. To an extent, I still am. Since I had Ghost to myself and some friends to play it with, they convinced me to start working to get better at the multiplayer, and they sat in game with me until I got my first kill, in which I went 1 in 47 that game. Yes, I still remember how mad everyone else in the game was besides my friends. From that day forward, I kept trying to improve on the game as much as possible. Later on in 2014, I got Mw2 and Mw3 since those were two major games that my friends were recommending I try out since they were the highlight of multiplayer COD. At the time, none of us knew that COD was experiencing a downfall. Eventually down the line, my friends moved back down to BO2, and I ended up going back to it as well for zombies while playing GTA 5 and Guitar Hero for the next few months. My 13th birthday hits, and Fat Matt got me the Tomb Raider reboot, knowing that Tomb Raider was a big part of my childhood. This game itself got me into story-driven games outside of GTA. Fast forward to my 8th grade year, and I got heavily into PC gaming. Thanks to Tomb Raider getting me into story-driven games, I ended up filling my library with games that we'll talk about in another video where I talk about my history with PC gaming. One major game that really influenced me into getting back into console gaming actually had to be Advanced Warfare, although I had it on PC. And that's because it had a really amazing campaign that blew me away with the visuals and the dialogue. After playing through that, I eventually jumped back on my 360 and played through the Mw2, Mw3, and Ghost campaign in the span of 2 days. And to make it hilarious, I was in Florida staying back at the hotel to do this while my family was in Disney. I had this TV at the hotel that had to be like 80 inches, and it was incredible seeing these games look that great on a big screen. Having this experience made me want a big TV for myself, and my parents gave me a 32-inch LG TV that was supposed to be a gift from my grandfather a year prior, but he ended up getting a bigger TV from someone else in the family. Playing my 360 on that TV made me love the experience of just sitting in my bed and playing games, and this made me eventually realize that although I loved PC gaming, I really needed to get a current gen console to not only play with my friends who had them, but to also have this big screen gaming experience. Yes, I know I could have also had a big screen experience on PC, but back then, for some reason, my TV really just did not like my PC at all. Like, the display would be all weird in there, the colors would look terrible, and it was just not a good experience. At this point in time, I got really into Destiny on the Xbox 360, which my friend Frankie let me borrow since he now had the Xbox One version. A few months later, my 14th birthday comes around, and I got my Xbox One. My console was bundled with the Master Chief Collection, but I also got GTA 5 and Destiny, which are games that I grinded like crazy for the entire summer. In terms of multiplayer games, I'd say Destiny was the one that I had my most hours on. As for GTA 5, I mainly played it on PC, but I still played it quite frequently with my friends on Xbox. I'd say the reason I never really ranked high in the game was because I kept jumping platforms. Like, I would have it on PS4, Xbox One, PC, and your rank wouldn't carry over regardless of if you were playing on the same account. But here's where my love for the Halo series began. Having the Halo Master Chief Collection bundled with my console, it influenced me to give Halo a second shot. None of my friends really liked the game at all growing up, so after playing Halo 1 through 3 with my dad when I was younger, I kind of put the series aside for a long time. Picking the game back up with the upgraded visuals and improved frame rates, I immediately fell in love with the story and gameplay. That year, I played Halo CE all the way till 4, and I was now waiting for Halo 5 to come out. Skip a few months now, and Christmas of 2015 comes along. I had just gotten my Black Ops 3 limited edition PS4 with a few PS4 games, but I also got a few new Xbox One games I had been meaning to try for a very long time. Right away, I played through the Halo 5 campaign in about 2 days, and I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, but I dropped the multiplayer quickly as it felt too much like Destiny to me, and at this point I was already playing Destiny on PS4, so I had no reason to play the Halo multiplayer. There was one game that I got that year that became my favorite Xbox franchise of all time though, and that was Gears of War, and I got Ultimate Edition for Christmas. It wasn't that one game itself that was my favorite, but there was a deal where if you bought that game, you got the entire Gears of War franchise via backwards compatibility, and Gears 2 became my favorite. Unlike Halo though, I didn't finish the series for a very long time. For the next few years, I started getting heavily into retro gaming, I started playing more PS4 exclusives as well as grinding multiplayer games on there, and I started giving Nintendo some more attention as well. So I wasn't really playing the Xbox One that much at all for some time, but I did start collecting for the original Xbox after I finally got my own after all those years of my dad's being broken. Eventually, I felt like everything that I did had to be recorded for YouTube, and I burnt myself out from video games and focused on improving on guitar for a long time. All the way from 2017 to 2019, I had a pretty major gaming hiatus. I think what's ironic about that is I finally had this big ass game room that I always wanted, and that's around the time that my hiatus started. However, in 2018, I started dating my girlfriend and decided that it was time to get a TV in my room for us to watch rather than going into my basement where my dad had his office in a separate room down there. I ended up getting a 4K TCL TV, and for a very short period of time, I actually did play through Gears of War 2 and part of 3 since I was just getting used to how cool it was to having a 55-inch TV. As I just stated though, the spark was gone again pretty quickly and my hiatus continued. Up until Black Friday of 2019, where I was on vacation with my girlfriend to visit her family, and we were just shopping. At the corner of my eye, I saw a GameStop, and I decided, fuck it. I haven't been in one of those in a few years now, so what better time to go than Black Friday? I walked in, and it was like my hiatus never started. I walked out with Shadow of the Tomb Raider for Xbox One since I had beaten Rise of the Tomb Raider a few years prior, Ratchet & Clank for the PS4, Black Ops 1 and 2 Black Ops 1 and Last of Us for the PS3, and LA Noire for the Switch. After playing those games for some time, my hiatus was finally over, and I was back into gaming. I wasn't nearly as into gaming as I was when I was a teenager at this time of Black Friday, but that changed as soon as the pandemic hit. At that point, I went crazy and started buying a ton of consoles and collecting games. A major platform that spiked my interest was the original Xbox, since it was one that I really didn't get to explore too much as a child since it was my dad's console. In about a span of a month, the console ended up having my biggest library of games on any platform ever, and to this day it still does. Games for the console were pretty cheap, and at this point, GameStop started having those crazy sales where you can get a huge hoard of games for like $20 or $30. This increased my library of games altogether, and it caused me to jump back on my Xbox One as well since I was also buying those used games since those games got pretty cheap. I then finally played through the rest of the Gears of War series and considered Gears of War my favorite Xbox franchise of all time. This is the last topic that I'm going to be talking about in this video because this brings us to the present. I finally decided to give Game Pass a shot in August of 2020, and that became the sole reason why Xbox is my main platform at the moment for third-party games. And it was also the reason that I got my Xbox Series X before I got my PS5. I only own 4 Xbox Series X games right now, but I'm currently playing through about 10 or 11 games on the Series X since Game Pass introduced me to such a big variety of games. So overall, my history with Xbox has been a lifelong journey. I've had my ups and downs with the platform, but as of now, I'm having a lot of positive experiences. As of now, the Xbox Series X is my main console for gaming, with the PS5 being my secondary console for exclusive titles and certain FPS games. I'm very excited to see what comes next with the platform, and the same can be said about all of the other platforms I own in general. Anyway guys, I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. My next video in the series that I will be discussing will be about Nintendo, and I'm sure that it won't be nearly as long as this one. I will see you guys all in the next video.